From haunted houses to slashers, let's talk about my favourite horror films. So hi, if you're new here, my name's Jean. I usually talk about books and history and mythology on my channel, but today I want to talk about another favourite subject of mine, which is horror films. Now for context, I never liked horror films growing up. I was the kid at the sleepover who would leave if a horror film was put on. And I don't say that for effect, I literally once left my friend's house around the age of 12 or 13 when it was dark outside to go home on the bus because I refused to watch the rest of the Silence of the Lambs. Even then, however, there were a few horror films that snuck into my rotation. You know, I was a Scream fan from a young age. I was just generally hesitant to watch horror more broadly until about 2020. By that point in my life, I loved horror literature and I felt like I was more open and ready to perhaps experience horror on the screen. And with the help of my husband, over the past 5 years, I have watched so many horror films. I have become a horror fiend, shall we say. I absolutely love the subgenre and I found so many kind of themes that I love in my horror, so many kinds of horror I love as well as films I love, and I thought I would sit down today and share with you my favourite 10 so far. I still hate the Silence of the Lambs though. So in no particular order, let's begin with the film that I feel sort of began my renewed journey into the genre in 2020 when I watched it, and that was Us. This is an undeniably phenomenal film. If you haven't seen it, you've heard of it. It has received so much praise and it is worth it and more. The film came out in 2019. It was written and directed by Jordan Peele and the lead star is of course Lupita Nyong'o. And she truly is the lead. All of the acting in this film is phenomenal. Do not get me wrong. Everybody plays their part and other parts so incredibly well, but the sort of power and adaptability of Lupita Nyong'o's acting in this film makes it for me. It is about a family and our protagonist is the mother of said family. She has her husband and her 2 kids, a boy and a girl, who go on a little family holiday to the beach where she used to spend some of her childhood. Of course there's something strange about this seaside town, there's something strange about this beach and some of the perhaps missing memories that our protagonist has of staying here as a child. We get flashbacks to her exploring a house of mirrors, a fun house on the pier, and we learn that once she leaves that house of mirrors, she doesn't speak for a period of time after that. But that childhood trauma kind of begins to pale in comparison to what is happening in the contemporary timeline when these strangers start appearing out of nowhere. It's a film that explores like class and hierarchy and oppression, and it's a metaphor for how one group benefits from the labour of the other, how society predicates itself on an oppressed class of people, a much larger class of people who are then sort of like the backbone of society. Something we can all acknowledge is incredibly true of the society we live in, but it's done really well. It's a really incredible metaphor. That's acted really well. The scares are there. There's some jump scares, there's some very creepy moments, and you also become incredibly invested in the lives of your protagonist. So I think all of that was done really well. It tells a very big story through the lens of one family and I love it. It's just incredible, impeccable, amazing, wonderful. Could not recommend it more highly. Now, since I've already mentioned it in my rambling introduction to this video, I'm going to talk about it again here, and that is Scream. This remains to this day one of my favourite horror films and probably my most watched horror film. I have seen the original Scream film and most of the films in the Scream franchise numerous times and it never disappoints, it always hits. It was written by Kevin Williamson and directed by Wes Craven and of course stars Neve Campbell as the ultimate final girl, Sydney Prescott. There's a bunch of other like well-known cast in there that you'll probably recognise, but I'm not going to list them all off here. They all do a phenomenal job, and I think what sometimes new viewers of Scream might miss is how influential this film was. I don't even think I would have realised the first time I watched it as a teenager, but I have sort of come to realise over rewatches and coming to understand horror better, and the horror that came before Scream, that Scream was building on, post like 80s and early 90s horror, which is how unique it is. It is a horror film, but it's also a satire of the horror genre. It's one of the first horror films, if not the first horror film to be self-referential, to recognise the horror genre, to allude to the horror genre and the tropes of the horror genre explicitly on the screen. And that way I think, particularly when you're a horror fan, there's that added layer and that added fun to it because you see yourself in the storyline. Of course, it is a quintessential slasher about a group of teenagers in high school, led by Neve Campbell, who are being hunted down and killed by Ghostface. Again, one of the most recognisable killers in a slasher movie with that mask. It's a film that's also made by its ensemble cast. I've mentioned Neve Campbell a couple of times, but actually when I think about it, I think one of the strengths of this film is the entire casting. Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Rose McGowan, Matthew Lillard, all of these people make the film what it is, their interaction, their dynamics, and that is what invests you in watching the sequels, if I'm being honest. So I really enjoyed that about it. But even once you know the killer, even once you know all the mystery, I still think it stands up to rewatching. It's got that satirical humour in it while still being full of jump scares and creepy moments and tension, so I love it. Alright, so my next film is one of those films that really exemplifies what I think horror does best, and that is truly explore the dark emotions, fears, grief, horror, terror of reality and our emotions. So it's like a reflection on our internal experiences but bringing it to life through the visual, and that is The Babadook. So The Babadook is written and directed by Jessie Kent, and it's an Australian film starring one of my favourite actresses, Essie Davis. She is a scream queen, but she is also the star of Miss Franny Fisher's detective agency. I love her, she is amazing. And this film is really a testament to her acting, but also the acting of her co-star and fictional son, Noah Wiseman. So this is actually a film with a sort of limited cast. There are other people in this film, but it's about these two characters, their relationship, what they're going through, and we spend most of our time with these two people, and in that sense is quite isolating and claustrophobic. But in the past few years, I can't remember the exact timeline, Essie Davis's character has lost her husband and her son has lost her father, and they are both dealing with and coping with this grief, and she is coping with the grief of losing her partner and being a single mother and struggling with her relationship with her son, and sort of communicating her grief and her experiences and her frustration as the adult in that situation. And of course her son is going through it all too, and he's an incredible child actor, I have to say, like really wow. But I think what most people know The Babadook for, if they haven't seen the film, is the Babadook itself. It's become a bit of like a pop culture icon, this creature, and the images of the Babadook can end up looking a little bit silly, I think, out of context. And when I went into this film, I wasn't expecting as deep and emotional a film as I got. The depth is truly there. This is one of the most emotional horror films I have ever seen. It is heart-wrenching, and again, like I said, it really explores those internal experiences and brings them to life metaphorically through this horror vision of the Babadook, and it's so creepy and the perfect representation, I think, of grief and anger and frustration and everything else that the characters are going through. It's kind of a take on The Haunted House, but with a direct link to these two characters and what they're going through. Actually, while we're on the topic of haunted houses, let's go for a more traditional, straightforward haunted house favourite of mine, and that is, of course, The Conjuring, and really the entire Conjuring franchise. I love The Conjuring 2 in particular, but we'll talk about The Conjuring 1 in more detail. So the original Conjuring came out in 2013 and is directed by James Wan, a huge name in horror. It's written by Chad and Carrie Hayes, and of course starring everybody's favourite horror duo, Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. So for anybody that's not familiar with the Conjuring universe, it starts off in the 1970s with the narrative of this film, and we're following one family who have moved into this big new house that they need to do up. But of course there's something not quite right about this house. Something has happened there in the past, and they start to experience ghostly, demonish presences, hauntings, and it's terrifying to them. So they seek out the help of the church and two paranormal investigators who are linked to the church, the Warrens. Now the Warrens were real people, Ed and Lorraine Warren, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding the real people. So for me, these films have to be completely divorced from them. Like, Patrick and Vera are not Ed and Lorraine Warren of history. They are the Ed and Lorraine Warren of the Conjuring universe, and they are the perfect couple. So they are this married couple who investigate paranormal activity, and Lorraine in particular has psychic vision. So they come in to help this family find out what's happening in their home and hopefully resolve their issues. And that's kind of the premise of each film. There's 4 films, including the most recent one that came out this year in the Conjuring franchise, but the Conjuring universe more widely has a bunch of other films linked to it that involve sort of haunted objects and ghosts and demons that cross over. So there's the Annabelle movies, there's the Nun movies, etc. And they're all great. Like, they're all great, but the Conjuring films themselves I think are the best. Number 3 for me is the weakest, and number 4 is completely fan service, but I loved it for that. So as horror films go, the first 2 are probably the strongest, and they are jump scare horrors. They are the kind of horror that I genuinely scream at. They don't give me nightmares because once they're over, I'm fine. But during the film, I will scream out loud, very loudly, whenever anything jumps out at me, and I really enjoy that. Like, it gets your heart rate up, you get really invested in what's going to happen, you don't know what's around every corner, there's fun, like, you know, paranormal mysteries to be solved, and they have these 2 characters, Ed and Lorraine, at the centre who you become very emotionally invested in throughout the franchise. Alright, so the next film on this list is actually, I think, the most recent film to make it to my top 10, and that is Frewaka, which is written and directed by Ashlyn Clark. Now, this is actually an Irish horror film, the majority of which is in the Irish language, with a little bit of English sprinkled in there, and it's also a folk horror film. So folk horror is one of my favourite subgenres of horror in literature and in cinema. I absolutely love it. Folk horror can take many forms, but it traditionally sort of like draws on, builds upon, or even, I guess, like misrepresents traditional beliefs and small community beliefs and folklore, and how that can all turn into horror. And what I love about this film is not only is it inspired by Irish folklore, but for me as a Scot, I can also see the sort of parallels to Scottish folklore, because there are of course a lot of commonalities with our ancestry both being in the Gaels. So I really enjoy that. This film is one that does draw, like I say, on traditional, I guess, Celtic folklore you could call it, and it does it so creatively because it builds on that idea that I grew up with, which is that the fair folk, or the fairies, are actually quite insidious beings that love to whisk humans away to their dark otherworld realm, and it's no good really for the humans. We might strike bargains with them to forestall it, but they're coming. And this is such an interesting film because it also explores family and grief and motherhood and daughterhood, can we call it that? But just kind of those dynamics through, again, quite a limited cast. There are a few different other characters, but mainly our 2 protagonists. A woman named Siobhan, who is a home care worker. She is expecting her first child with her wife, but she has to go away for a little bit to basically be like the in-house care for this older woman who is struggling and has recently had a fall. Except that there's something strange about this house. There's iron around every door frame. There's all these little herbs and traditions and knickknacks and trinkets that are meant to keep the fair folk away, and our older protagonist Peg is terrified of something that might be inside the house, it might be outside the house, who knows. But it's another very beautiful, emotional film. I really love how horror can like dig into those emotions and fears, but also, like I said, I love the way that it draws on traditional folklore and it creates something really visually pleasing in the contrast of the modern world with these traditional beliefs. It's really intriguing and beautiful, and I mean the poster itself is just out of this world. Okay, let's talk about something a little bit more fun, shall we? Yes, fun. There is fun to be had within horror, especially in the sort of darkly comedic subgenre of horror, which I do believe this film falls into, and that is Ready or Not. So this is a 2019 film that stars one of the absolute scream queens of the 21st century, Samara Weaving. She is phenomenal in all horror. She's a great actress in general, but she's quite well known for her horror roles, and this is one of my favourites. I had such a good time watching this film. It has elements of a slasher and a kind of like locked room, closed door mystery thriller where it's all very fast paced and high energy, whilst also being incredibly kind of witty and quirky, which I really like. It's about Samara Weaving's character, who has just got married to the love of her life, and to her absolute joy has been welcomed in to his wealthy family. So she grew up, I believe, in foster care, not knowing her family, and she's always felt like there's something missing in her life. She's always wanted this family, and she feels like this is the start of it. You know, she's found the love of her life. He's got this big wonderful family of siblings and cousins and brothers and sisters-in-laws and the mum and the dad, etc., who are all part of this very, very wealthy family, who have for generations now run this gaming company. So they produce games. I think it might have started with card games, but they produce games, and they're really into games. So after the wedding comes to an end in the evening, all the immediate members of this family come together to play a game. This is how they sort of induct or welcome new people into the family after any weddings take place. And Samara Weaving's character draws the hide and seek card. So that is the game they're going to be playing, but of course this is a horror film, and that is the one card that you did not want to pull, because this game, this version of hide and seek, is deadly. And there's a whole motif to do with deals with the devils in there, and it obviously just sort of draws on various horror tropes to create something very fast-paced and fun, but it is like held together by, I think, Samara Weaving's acting. Like, she brings this character to life. You absolutely adore her. Like, you love her character. You're so rooting for her. She's just an absolute queen, and I love her. She's phenomenal. And I do believe that a sequel to this film is in the works, which is very intriguing. I'm looking forward to seeing what that's all about. But the first film very much stands on its own. It's bloody and goofy and compelling and fast-paced and fun, and you'll have a really good time with this one. It's also a good reminder of, no matter how much you argue with your friends and family during game night, it could be worse. Alright, so my next film, depending on the day you asked me, I might tell you is my favourite horror film of all time. It's certainly one of my favourite films. It often makes my top 5 films when anybody asks me that question, and it is the only horror film to make it there, so I guess it's my favourite horror film. But that is Pan's Labyrinth by Guillermo del Toro. Now, I love del Toro, I love everything I've seen by him to varying degrees, but this is the standout. It is truly beautiful. It is also historical. It is also dark fantasy. It's a little bit of everything, and I actually think it's one of those films where it can appeal to a lot of viewers. Like, I don't think you need to be into fantasy or horror to enjoy this film. I know I watched it for the first time with my mum, and she loved the historical side of it in particular. So this film is in Spanish, and it is set in the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War. So when Spain is under the control of General Franco, but there are still rebels out there for the other side, and our protagonist is actually a child. She is a young girl who moves with her mother, who's newly married to one of Franco's generals, to the countryside. Her mum's pregnant, and it's obviously like a lot. Her country has been in war, but she's also a child whose mother's just remarried. She doesn't really get on with this stepdad, who's basically this violent general trying to take down the rebels, and she's kind of just like exploring and figuring out her new surroundings, only to meet with a faun. So she stumbles upon this faun who basically gives her an opportunity to undertake these magical quests to support and protect her mother, who is pregnant. The practical effects in this film are out of this world, as is the case with every Guillermo del Toro film, and what I love about something like this, which is from 2006, is that the practical effects don't age. You watch and you think, wow, this is amazing. And I do think there is just something more special about a practical effect than there ever will be about CGI. So I love that about the film. The costuming, the setting, everything about the production behind this movie and the acting is incredible. Every layer you unpick is beautiful. And though it's dark fantasy, it's also historical, and really it's about how we use folklore and fantasy to process our emotions and our experiences, particularly at a young age, how we see the world through this lens, and you can take what you want about the reality of everything happening, and it still packs a punch. It is beautiful. It just occurred to me that I lied to you. I lied to you. When I said that Frewaka was the most recent film to make on this list, it's not, because actually in very close succession, but shortly afterwards, I watched Sinners, which is also very firmly on this list. This is one of the best films I've watched this year, and it's a film that I'm definitely going to be revisiting. So Sinners is, and was, if you're watching this in the future, a 2025 film which is written and directed by Ryan Coogler. Now it has a huge and phenomenal cast, but the stars are probably Michael B. Jordan and Miles Caton. So this film is set in the aftermath of World War I. We're following our characters in 1932 Mississippi, when two twin brothers, both played by Michael B. Jordan, have returned from fighting in the war and bought up this big barn in rural Mississippi near their local town, to basically create a sort of like bar or joint or dance house for their local community. And actually the main narrative of this film actually takes place over the course of 24 hours, this day and night. Their younger cousin, the other protagonist, is played, like I said, by Miles Caton, and he hasn't seen his cousins obviously in years, and he in that time has grown up and become very well versed with the guitar. He loves music, and this film, as much as it's a horror film, is a love letter to music and community and the way that music binds communities, particularly in regard to blues music, historically for the Black community in the United States of America. And like, it's just beautiful, that layer that is so special to it, and I think again sort of makes it something more or other than a horror film. Like, you don't have to be into horror to enjoy this film, although there are like bloody, violent and scary elements that come in later. It's equally kind of a slice of life film, and the soundtrack is obviously phenomenal, as it would be with a film like that. It's beautiful, and I really want to own the soundtrack on vinyl, but also with a horror edge. And I don't want to give away what the horror aspect is if you haven't like heard too much about it. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's definitely there, so do expect some horror with this film. It's just that it's not solely a horror film. Okay, so my penultimate film is another like classic favourite of mine. So this is like pre me getting into horror, but growing up and not realising there were horror films that I loved, which is The Craft. So I think any 80s, 90s, even early 2000s witchy teens and kids who were like into that stuff like me have seen and loved The Craft. It is an iconic film from 1996, which was directed by Andrew Fleming and starring 4 incredible young women in the lead roles. It's about 4 friends at high school, so 4 teenage girls, one of whom is new to their town, new to their school, and who gets sort of like welcomed into their group, which kind of is made up of the outcasts, you know, they're the alternative kids, the ones that are bullied or looked down upon for various reasons, and they form a coven. What else were they going to do, you know? Like, turn to witchcraft. That's always the answer. And they start kind of learning about these powers that they share and what they are capable with through them, but also like the ethics of this magic and this power they now hold, because what is right and wrong, and when you have this power, what can you do with it and what should you do with it, and does it corrupt them and does it lead them down nefarious paths? How does it affect those around them because they're the ones being magicked? They're the ones that their powers are being used against, and also does it bond them or pull them apart? So it's a film about friendship, it's a film about fitting in and kind of like a desire to, I guess, have revenge against those who mistreat you, but also like how far that goes. And it's got that magical, fantastical element, but it is kind of just about teenage girls, which I love, and is one of the reasons I loved it growing up. I watched it time and time again, and it also just is quintessentially 90s. There is something so special for me, probably just because of nostalgia, about 90s paranormal, supernatural and fantasy media, whether it be Charmed or X-Files or Buffy or Angel or things like The Craft. There's just this kind of like aura that I don't know how to explain other than just say it's just so 90s. I guess you could call it whimsy goth maybe. But because of that, this film obviously holds a lot of nostalgia for me. The fashion, the visuals, the direction, the acting, the actors, because it's a lot of really famous like 90s names who, again, I've seen in a lot of stuff before and since, and it has that charm. But I also just think it's a genuinely good film that stands the test of time. Alright, so final film. Okay, so final film. I swithered a lot about what film would go into this spot, even though it's not like a ranked list, but I did swither back and forth about what's number 10, like what is the final film to make the cut. A lot of these films are really obvious, easy answers for me, and it might change depending on the week you ask me, but for now, I think I'm giving that place to Companion, which is a film I just absolutely loved. Now, I just looked it up on Wikipedia and it's listed as a science fiction thriller, but I think that just goes to show the kind of impossibility of fully defining genre. Like, people are going to disagree on what exactly is and isn't horror, but I still think it's close enough to horror to be included in this video, and it's also a sci-fi thriller, so there you go. But this is a 2025 film directed and written by Drew Hancock, directorial debut, I believe, so very impressive, and starring another absolute scream queen of the 21st century, Sophie Thatcher. Sophie Thatcher is incredible. She was incredible in Heretic, even if I thought the third act wasn't as great as the first two. She's amazing in Yellow Jackets and she's phenomenal in this. I think she's really good at capturing like the subtlety of certain emotions, and this is a film about male violence and toxic relationships and the nice guy trope and kind of objectification of women and not seeing them as human. And I don't know quite what to say about this film because in some of the trailers there's a spoiler. If you've seen the trailers and seen the film, you'll know exactly what that is, and it's not like the big spoiler that gives away the ending, but it's something that happens, I'd say, about a quarter into the film, and it's kind of nice. I would imagine if you didn't know that going in. It didn't affect my enjoyment. I had seen the trailer, I knew exactly what was coming with that little spoiler, but I want to give you the opportunity to not know about it going in if you haven't seen a trailer. Just take my word for it. I think the teaser is fine, but the full trailer just gives something away that might be fun to discover for the first time during the film. But I can say that the very initial premise is about this young couple, Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid, who are going to spend the weekend with some friends, I think two other couples, in one of the girl's boyfriend's, like her wealthy older boyfriend's house. So they're going to go visit this house together and spend the weekend there, and Sophie Thatcher in particular feels a little bit uncomfortable. She doesn't feel like Jack Quaid's friends really like her, so she's kind of trying to fit in and impress them and show Jack Quaid that she is the best girlfriend he could possibly have, and all of those insecurities, but obviously things take a turn. In fact, from the offset, from the very beginning, you know that Jack Quaid and Sophie Thatcher are going to fall out, and there's going to be some massive violence between them, because that like is a flash forward that happens at the beginning, and like I said, it really just does a bit of like a deep dive into male violence in relationships and the objectification of women, and I love Sophie Thatcher's character arc and how she comes into herself throughout this film, and I think she represents a lot of women's experiences of sort of being a woman. So I really enjoyed this film without giving much away, but I thought it was really well done and just like very compelling, again quite fast paced, and you cannot look away. So those are, I think, for now, my top 10 favourite horror films. It's hard to be definitive, and I'm probably going to flash up a little selection of honourable mentions on the screen now of others that I absolutely adore and would also highly recommend checking out. I'll list them down below in case you missed them, as well as the ones I've talked about in more detail, but I'm always on the hunt for more horror films to watch. I definitely have my favourite subgenres, but I'm pretty open to trying different things. There are a few things I definitely steer clear of, but I'd love any recommendations you have of classic horror, sort of indie horror, newer horror, stuff you think I would enjoy based on my taste, and also just stuff that you love. What's the film that got you into horror or helped you realise the depth and potential of horror as a genre? Let me know. I want to chat about this all with you. And if you're interested in my favourite horror books, then I do also have a video which I've just uploaded before this one on that very subject. And until next time, I'll see you all again soon. Bye everyone.